Welcome to my channel Horror Stories, and please subscribe. I never wanted to inherit this place. The weathered sign at the end of the gravel driveway still reads Whitefish Lake Indian Residential School, though nature has been slowly reclaiming it for decades. Thick vines twist around the rusted metal poles, and moss creeps across the faded lettering. I've thought about tearing it down 100 times, but something always stops me. Maybe it's the weight of history, or maybe it's just cowardice. My name is James Whitmore, and my grandfather, William Whitmore, was the last headmaster of this godforsaken place before it shuttered its doors in 1986. I barely knew the man. He died when I was just a kid, but his legacy has cast a long shadow over my family. Growing up, we never talked about the school or what happened here. It was like a black hole at the center of our family history, pulling everything into its darkness. When my father passed away last year, I inherited the property. 160 acres of dense pine forest surrounding a cluster of dilapidated buildings on the shores of Whitefish Lake. I'd never set foot on the grounds before, despite growing up just a few hours away in Edmonton. Now, at 32, I found myself the reluctant caretaker of a place that had haunted the edges of my consciousness for as long as I could remember. I tell myself I'm only here to assess the property and decide what to do with it. Sell it, most likely, though I'm not sure who'd want to buy this cursed plot of land. The realtor I spoke with suggested it might make a good location for a rural retreat or wilderness camp. The very thought made my skin crawl. As I pull up to the main building, gravel crunching under my tires, a chill runs down my spine despite the warm summer air. The three-story structure looms before me, its red brick facade stained with age and neglect. Broken windows gape like empty eye sockets, and ivy crawls up the walls like grasping fingers. To the left, I can see the smaller dormitory buildings, and beyond them, the shore of the lake glimmers in the late afternoon sun. I take a deep breath, steeling myself before stepping out of the car. The silence is oppressive, broken only by the whisper of wind through the pines and the occasional bird call. No children's laughter, no sounds of life, just the hollow emptiness of abandonment. The front door groans in protest as I push it open, hinges thick with rust. The musty smell of decay assaults my nostrils as I step inside. Dust motes dance in the shafts of sunlight streaming through the broken windows. To my right, a faded portrait of my grandfather hangs crookedly on the wall. His stern gaze seems to follow me as I move deeper into the building. I've come prepared with a flashlight, and I flick it on as I navigate the gloomy hallways. Peeling paint and water-stained walls tell the story of years of neglect. Classrooms still hold rows of battered desks, as if waiting for students who will never return. In one room, a chalkboard bears the faint outline of words I will not speak. My language, my stomach turns. As I climb the creaking stairs to the second floor, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. Shadows seem to flit at the edges of my vision, always disappearing when I turn to look. I tell myself it's just my imagination, fueled by the oppressive atmosphere of this place. But the prickling on the back of my neck tells a different story. The administrative offices are on this floor, and I make my way to what must have been my grandfather's. The door is locked, but the wood around the handle is rotted. With a firm shove, it gives way. The room is like a time capsule. Dust-covered filing cabinets line the walls, and a massive oak desk dominates the center of the space. Behind it, a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II hangs askew. I approach the desk, running my fingers over the smooth wood. This is where he sat, where he made the decisions that shaped and often ruined so many young lives. I try the drawers, but they're locked. In frustration, I yank harder on one, and to my surprise, the lock gives way with a snap. Inside, I find stacks of yellowed papers, letters, and journals. My heart races as I realize what I've stumbled upon: a first-hand account of the school's operations. With trembling hands, I begin to read. The words swim before my eyes, each sentence more horrifying than the last. Punishments for speaking native languages. Children torn from their families. Abuse, physical, emotional, and worse. My grandfather's neat handwriting catalogs it all with a clinical detachment that makes my blood run cold. I don't know how long I sit there, poring over the documents. The light outside is faded, and shadows lengthen across the room. As I reach for another file, a floorboard creaks behind me. I whirl around, heart pounding, but there's no one there. just the empty doorway and the darkened hallway beyond. "Hello," I call out, my voice sounding small and frightened in the gloom. No response, just the settling of the old building around me. I shake my head, trying to calm my nerves. I'm alone here. There's no one else. But as I turn back to the desk, I freeze. The papers I'd been reading are gone. In their place is a single photograph I hadn't seen before. It shows a group of children, all of them indigenous, standing in front of the school. Their faces are solemn, eyes haunted. And there, in the background, is my grandfather, his hand resting on the shoulder of a young girl whose expression makes my heart ache. I snatch up the photo, shoving it into my pocket. I need to get out of here, to process what I've learned. As I hurry down the stairs, that feeling of being watched intensifies. The shadows seem to move with purpose now, reaching out for me. A child's laughter echoes down the hallway, and I break into a run. I burst out of the front doors, gasping for breath. The sun has nearly set, painting the sky in deep purples and reds. As I fumble for my car keys, a movement near the tree line catches my eye. A figure stands there, small and indistinct in the gathering darkness. A child? "Hey," I call out, taking a few steps forward. "Are you okay? You shouldn't be out here." The figure doesn't respond. Instead, it turns and melts into the shadows of the forest. I stare after it, my mind reeling. There shouldn't be anyone else here. This property has been abandoned for decades. As I drive away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I can't stop thinking about what I've discovered. The horrors inflicted in that place, the lives destroyed, and my family's role in all of it. I have a responsibility now, I realize, to uncover the truth, to bring it to light. But something tells me the truth doesn't want to be found. As I glance in my rearview mirror, I swear I see a group of children standing at the end of the driveway, watching me go. I blink and they're gone. This isn't over. I'll be back tomorrow, armed with more than just a flashlight this time. I need answers. I need to know what really happened at Whitefish Lake. And I have a sinking feeling that the school isn't done with me yet. Sleep doesn't come easily that night. I toss and turn in my hotel room, haunted by visions of sorrowful children and the echoes of my grandfather's clinical notes. When I finally drift off, my dreams are a kaleidoscope of horror, small hands reaching out from beneath floorboards, muffled cries behind locked doors, and always, always, always the feeling of being watched. I wake with a start, drenched in sweat. The digital clock on the nightstand blinks 3:33 a.m. As my eyes adjust to the darkness, I notice something on the desk that wasn't there before: the photograph from my grandfather's office. My blood runs cold. I know I left it in my jacket pocket, which is hanging by the door. With trembling hands, I reach for the picture. As I pick it up, a folded piece of paper falls out from behind it. I unfold it to find a childish scrawl in faded pencil. "Find us. Tell our story. Don't let them hide us again." My heart hammers in my chest. This can't be real. I'm still dreaming, I tell myself. But the paper feels all too solid in my shaking hands. I don't sleep again that night. As soon as the sun rises, I'm on my way back to Whitefish Lake. I've armed myself with a better flashlight, a digital camera, and a voice recorder. If there are ghosts here and a part of me can't believe I'm even considering that possibility, I intend to document everything. The school looks different in the harsh light of morning, less menacing but more melancholy. Paint peels from the clapboard siding of the dormitories, and weeds push through cracks in the concrete walkways. It's a place forgotten by time, left to rot with its terrible secrets. I start my investigation in the main building, methodically working my way through each room. I photograph everything: the empty classrooms, the abandoned infirmary, the cavernous dining hall with its long tables still set in neat rows. All the while, I narrate into my voice recorder, describing what I see and how it makes me feel. It's in the basement that things take a turn. The air is thick and damp, heavy with the scent of mold and something else, something metallic and unpleasant. My flashlight beam cuts through the gloom, illuminating rows of storage shelves and old maintenance equipment. As I pan the light across the room, it catches on something that makes my breath catch in my throat. Scratches in the concrete wall, dozens of them, clustered together. Upon closer inspection, I realized their tally marks. Someone was counting the days down here. "Oh God," I whisper, my words captured by the recorder. "What happened here?" As if in answer, a child's voice echoes through the basement of blood and tears. "That's what they built this place on." I whirl around, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I call out, but I'm met with only silence. When I play back the recording later, there's no trace of the voice. I spend hours combing through the basement, looking for any other signs of what might have happened. In a locked closet, the door of which swings open at my touch, despite the rusted padlock, I find stacks of files. Unlike the sanitized reports in my grandfather's office, these are raw incident reports, medical records, and page after page of complaints that were never addressed. The stories within make me physically ill. Children punished for speaking their native languages, subjected to medical experiments, disappeared without explanation. And through it all, my grandfather's name, again and again, authorizing punishments and dismissing concerns. I'm so engrossed in the files that I don't notice the temperature dropping until I can see my breath misting in the air. The light bulb in my flashlight flickers, and shadows seem to coalesce in the corners of the room. A small hand tugs at my jacket. I spin around with a strangled cry. A young girl stands before me, no more than 7 or 8 years old. She wears a faded dress that might once have been blue, and her long dark hair hangs in 2 braids. But it's her eyes that capture me, deep pools of sorrow that have seen far too much. "You came back," she says, her voice a whisper that seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I struggle to find my voice. I did. Who are you?" "Sarah," she replies. Sarah Bird's tone. "I've been waiting for someone to find us." "Yes," I managed to ask. Sarah nods solemnly. "We're all still here, trapped. The bad things they did, they keep us here." I kneel down, trying to meet her eyes. "I'm so sorry for what happened to you, to all of you. Can you tell me more?" But Sarah is looking past me now, her eyes wide with fear. "He's coming," she whispers. "He doesn't want you to know. You have to hide." Before I can ask who she means, Sarah vanishes like smoke in the wind. The temperature plummets further, and the shadows in the corners of the room seem to grow, reaching out with tendrils of darkness. Heavy footsteps echo from the stairs, getting closer. Panic grips me. I shove the files into my backpack and look frantically for a place to hide. There's an old wardrobe against one wall. It'll have to do. I squeeze inside, pulling the door closed just as the footsteps enter the room. Through a crack in the wardrobe door, I see a figure enter. It's a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the stern uniform of a school administrator from decades past. As he turns, I have to stifle a gasp. It's my grandfather. But not as I remember him from old photographs. This version of William Whitmore is gaunt, his face a mask of cruelty. His eyes, God, his eyes are empty, black voids that seem to drink in the light. He stalks around the room, nostrils flaring as if scenting the air. When he speaks, his voice is like gravel scraping over bone. "I know you're here, boy," he growls. "Did you think you could come into my school and dig up the past without consequences? This place has rules. The children learn to obey, or they suffer." A whimper escapes my lips before I can stop it. My grandfather's head snaps toward the wardrobe, a terrible grin spreading across his face. "There you are." The wardrobe door flies open, and a hand like ice closes around my throat. The world goes black as my grandfather's spectral hand closes around my throat. I struggle, gasping for air, my feet dangling above the ground. His face looms before me, those bottomless black eyes boring into my soul. "You shouldn't have come here," Jamesy snarls. "Some secrets are meant to stay buried." Just as my vision starts to fade, a chorus of children's voices rises around us. The temperature drops even further, and a wind whips through the basement, scattering papers and dust. My grandfather's grip loosens as he turns, confusion and something like fear crossing his face. "No," he growls. "You can't interfere. I am the master here. But the voices grow louder, and ghostly forms begin to materialize around us. Dozens of children, their eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, their faces set in determination. I recognize Sarah among them, standing at the forefront. Not anymore, Sarah says, her voice ringing with power. We've been silent too long. It's time for the truth. My grandfather roars in rage, releasing me to lunge at the spectral children. But as his hands pass through them, their forms seem to solidify. They press in around him, their small hands grasping at his clothes, his limbs, his face. He struggles, but there are too many of them. No, you can't. I won't let you. His words are cut off as the mass of children seem to absorb him, his form dissipating like mist in the morning sun. In moments he's gone, leaving only the ghostly children and me, slumped against the wall, gulping in air. Sarah approaches me, her expression softer now but still sorrowful. Are you okay, she asks. I nod, still too shaken to speak. The other children hang back, watching me with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. We've been waiting so long for someone to come, Sarah continues. Someone who could hear us, who would listen. Will you tell our stories? I find my voice at last. Yes, I croak. I'll tell everyone what happened here. I promise. Sarah smiles. The first time I've seen any of these spirits do so. Thank you. But there's more you need to see, to understand. Will you let us show you? Part of me wants to run, to get as far away from this place as possible. But I know I can't. I have a responsibility now, to these children and to the truth. I nod. Sarah takes my hand. Her touch is cool but not unpleasant. The world around us seems to shimmer and fade, replaced by vivid scenes from the past. I see children torn from their families, arriving at the school scared and confused. I feel their pain as their hair is cut, their clothes burned, their names replaced with numbers. I witness the punishments for speaking their native languages, mouths washed out with soap, hands struck with rulers, hours spent kneeling on hard floors. The visions grow darker. Children huddled in cold dormitories, hunger gnawing at their bellies. The infirmary, where treatments left scars, both physical and mental. The hidden rooms where the worst abuses took place, screams muffled by thick walls. Through it all, I see my grandfather, not the specter I encountered, but the living man. Cold, calculating, overseeing it all with a detached efficiency that chills me to the bone. I see him writing in his journal, documenting the progress of stripping away culture and identity. The scenes shift faster now, a dizzying whirlwind of images. Children trying to run away, only to be brought back and punished severely. Secret burials in the woods for those who didn't survive. The despair, the loss of hope, the slow crushing of spirits. And then, finally, I see the last days of the school. Investigations, protests, the government finally stepping in. I watch my grandfather burning documents, threatening staff, trying desperately to cover up decades of abuse and neglect. As the visions fade, I find myself back in the basement, tears streaming down my face. The ghostly children surround me, their eyes pleading. Now you know, Sarah says softly. Will you help us? I wipe my eyes, a fierce determination settling over me. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes to bring this to light, to get justice for all of you. Sarah nods, a weight seeming to lift from her small shoulders. There's evidence hidden here, things your grandfather couldn't destroy. In the old groundskeeper's cottage beneath the floorboards, and in the lake. There are secrets in the lake. I shudder, not wanting to think about what might be hidden in those dark waters. But I know I'll have to face it. What happens now, I ask, to all of you? Sarah looks at the other children, a silent communication passing between them. We've been bound here by pain and secrets, but now that someone knows, someone who will speak the truth, maybe we can finally rest. But not yet, not until everyone knows what happened here. I stand, my legs shaky but my resolve firm. I understand. I won't let you down. As I move to leave the basement, gathering my scattered belongings, I notice the children starting to fade. But before they disappear entirely, Sarah speaks one last time. Be careful, James. There are others who want to keep the past buried. Your grandfather wasn't the only one with secrets, and not all the monsters here are dead. With those chilling words, the spirits vanish, leaving me alone in the cold basement. I take a deep breath, steeling myself for what's to come. I have a long road ahead investigating, documenting, fighting to bring the truth to light. It won't be easy, and it's clear there are forces that will try to stop me. But as I climb the stairs, emerging into the fading daylight, I feel the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. For Sarah, for all the children who suffered here, and for the sake of justice, I'll see this through to the end. I head towards the groundskeeper's cottage, my heart pounding with a mixture of fear and determination. Whatever secrets are hidden there, whatever horrors await in the lake, I'll face them. The truth of Whitefish Lake Indian Residential School will be revealed, no matter the cost. The next few weeks blur together in a frenzy of investigation and revelation. The groundskeeper's cottage yields a trove of hidden documents, financial records showing embezzlement, correspondence revealing a network of complicit officials, and most damning of all, a ledger listing children who had disappeared from the school's records. But it's what I find in the lake that truly breaks me. On a misty morning, I hire a local diver to explore the murky depths. What he brings up turns this from a historical atrocity into a modern-day crime scene. Small bones weathered by time and water, but unmistakably human. Children's shoes, dozens of them, weighed down with rocks. And sealed plastic containers holding waterlogged documents, more evidence my grandfather had tried to destroy. I alert the authorities. Within days, the property is swarming with police, forensic teams, and investigators. The story breaks in the national news, and suddenly, Whitefish Lake is at the center of a firestorm. As the investigation unfolds, I continue my own research. I track down former students, now elders, who share their stories with trembling voices and tear-filled eyes. I comb through archives, piecing together the broader context of the residential school system and my family's role in it. It's during one of these late-night research sessions that I have my final encounter with the supernatural. I'm in my hotel room, surrounded by papers and laptop screens, when the temperature suddenly drops. I look up to see Sarah standing before me, but she's not alone. Dozens of children stand with her, their forms more solid and peaceful than I've ever seen them. "Thank you," Sarah says, her voice filled with a quiet joy. "The truth is coming out. Our stories are being heard." I smile through my tears. "I promised I wouldn't let you down." "You've done more than that," another child says. "You've given us peace." As I watch, the children begin to glow with a soft light. One by one, they fade away, their faces serene. Sarah is the last to go. "Our time here is done," she says. "But please, don't forget us." "Never, I promise. I'll make sure the world remembers." With a final smile, Sarah disappears, and warmth returns to the room. For the first time since this all began, I feel a sense of peace myself. The aftermath is long and painful. The investigation expands, encompassing not just Whitefish Lake, but the entire residential school system. More graves are found at other sites across the country. My family's name is dragged through the mud, generations of complicity exposed. I testify before a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, laying bare everything I've discovered. It's a grueling experience, but a cathartic one. I meet with indigenous leaders, offering what feels like an inadequate apology for my family's actions, but it's accepted with a grace I don't feel I deserve. The months turn into years. Whitefish Lake becomes a memorial site, a place of healing and remembrance. The buildings are torn down, and in their place rises a beautiful garden, with a central monument listing the names of every child who suffered there. I use my inheritance money built on the suffering of innocence to establish a foundation supporting indigenous education and cultural preservation. It's a small step towards making amends, but it's a start. On the 5th anniversary of my first visit to Whitefish Lake, I return for the memorial service. As I stand before the gathered crowd, survivors, families, dignitaries, I feel the weight of the past and the hope for the future. "We cannot change what happened here," I say, my voice carrying across the silent gathering. "But we can honor those who suffered by telling their stories, by facing the truth of our history, and by working towards genuine reconciliation." the children of Whitefish Lake, and all the residential schools will never be forgotten again. As I speak, a warm breeze rustles through the memorial garden. For just a moment, I swear I see Sarah standing at the edge of the woods, smiling. Then she's gone, finally at peace. The legacy of Whitefish Lake will always be one of pain and injustice. But now it's also a testament to the power of truth, the importance of remembrance, and the possibility of healing. The secrets of the past have been brought to light, and in that light, we can begin to forge a better future. As I lay a wreath at the memorial, I make one final, silent promise to Sarah and all the children who suffered here. Your stories will be told, your lives will be honored, and your spirits will guide us towards a more just and compassionate world. The whispers of Whitefish Lake have become a chorus of remembrance, echoing across the country and through time. And I, James Whitmore, once the inheritor of a dark legacy, have found my purpose in amplifying those voices and working towards a future where such atrocities can never happen again. When I was 8 years old, my family moved away from our busy home in the city to a small, sleepy town in the countryside. My dad had gotten a new job, at the nuclear power plant. The plant loomed over the town, its chimneys coughing out thick smoke onto the houses. Our homes almost seemed like an afterthought, protruding from the side of the plant like a sudden growth when its creators realized too late that their workers would need somewhere to live. We lived on Strand Street to the east of Building A. Although it was long ago now, I still remember the day we moved very clearly. As soon as we came into view of the towers, the air seemed to feel heavy. It was as if a damp, thick blanket had been pulled up over me, pressing down on my shoulders. When I took a labored breath, my mouth filled with an odd chemical taste. I rolled up my window. The sun was only just beginning to set. We'd been rushing around all day trying to cram the last of our things into the car, and yet the town was deserted. I pressed my face against the glass to try and peer into the windows of houses as we drove past, but it didn't seem like anyone was home at all. Each window pane was fully covered from the inside, not allowing even a speck of light to poke through. "I'm sure there'll be lots of other children in our street," Charlie said, my mom, seeming to read my mind. She turned around, squeezing my hand. I tried to smile. "That's our house right there," chimed Dad, pointing to a small brick house at the end of the terrace. As he tried his best to park on the narrow road, I noticed a couple walking very quickly past us, carrying gray shopping bags. They glanced behind them every now and then, as if they were being followed by something only they could see. They finally stopped at a house just a few doors down from ours, and the woman let out a breath she'd been holding. She then began to point towards us and whisper something to the man, who was already staring worriedly at my parents as they unpacked the car. I hopped out and stood close to my dad, who was enthusiastically shaking the man's hand and introducing us. My dad was the type of person who could quickly become friends with anyone he met, whether they wanted to or not. The man, Mr. Gregg, looked a little uncomfortable and began glancing over his shoulder again. Mrs. Gregg wrung her hands together and began to talk to my parents when she was suddenly interrupted by a knock on their window. Inside, a boy about my age was poking his head through the thick curtains as if he was searching for something. He looked down at me and broke into a wide grin, showing off a missing front tooth. As quickly as he appeared, the window was now empty, and we heard thundering footsteps from inside the house. Mars Gregg turned on her heel and almost ran towards the house in an attempt to herd the boy back in. He came flying down the street nevertheless, almost bowling me over. "I'm Toby," he said, barely waiting for me to introduce myself before asking about the book in my hand and talking a mile a minute about how he had just started reading that series too, and what was my favorited character, and had I got to the really scary bit. The Gregg stood on looking nervous, and my mum gently shooed Toby and I indoors to go and find my new room. As I followed Toby and listened to his excited chatter echoing around our empty house, I looked back to see the Greggs talking in hushed tones to my parents. The smile had worn off my dad's face, and him and my mum now had the same look of fear I had just seen on Toby's parents. My mum had told me weeks before, when my dad had gotten his job, that the move would take some getting used to. Some things were easier than others. I loved having my own room. There was so much more space to play than in our little flat. Even the new junior school didn't seem so scary now that I would have Toby by my side in September. But some things took a little longer to take in. Toby and I could spend hours happily playing in the road, kicking round an old football, or running about being pirates. But each day when the sun began to set, our mothers would appear on the doorstep and hurriedly call us inside. My mum wasn't quite on the same level as Toby's yet. Mars Grieg seemed to permanently hover behind her door, just waiting for an alarm to go off in her head so she could call him in. Toby, on the other hand, wasn't fazed at all about the curfew. When he heard his mum call, he would roll his eyes before smiling at me and jumping up from the patch of pavement serving as our ship and jogging off to his house. For me and my mum, however, the routine felt strange. My mum had always been caring to me, of course, but had never seemed half as worried when we lived in the city. I could spend all day in the park across the road reading my book on the swings, only coming in for dinner once it already gone dark. But now she would look almost scared as she waited for me to walk the short distance to our house, her frown only easing once I was inside with the door shut. My dad would return home a little while later, walking alongside Mr. Grieg after they finished their workday. Dad slid a bolt on the door when he came in. We'd close all the curtains and then sit and eat our dinner, accompanied by the ever-present humming of the plant. A few weeks later, I was almost used to our strange new routine. Something which did still get to me, however, was the noise. Even though I was used to the bustle of the city with all the traffic and people, there was something different about the noise of the plant. It wasn't even a constant humming. On the days when the acrid smoke was at its thickest, it was a grinding, groaning, booming screech that made the ground shake slightly. I mentioned this to Toby, who held his hand up to his ear and said, "Oh, yeah," as if he was hearing it for the first time. "I guess you get used to it after a while. We've been here a year now. Maybe if you're here a year, you won't hear it either," he reassured me. "I don't know how you couldn't hear it. It's everywhere, even in my house," I lamented. Toby thought for a while and then spoke again in an uncharacteristically quiet voice. "Well, there is somewhere where you can't hear it, but it's quite far away," he added hurriedly, already seeing the smile on my face. So far, I hadn't ventured further than a couple streets away. I felt cooped up and just wanted to explore. "It's still very bright though, isn't it?" I asked him, looking up at the sky. Toby looked at his dinosaur watch, up to the sky and to my hopeful face in quick succession. "I'm sure we've got time," he decided. "Let's go." Toby led the way, his trainers thudding down the pavement. "Wait a minute," I called, the thick air burning my lungs as I struggled to keep up. Toby whipped around, seeming concerned about both my increasingly red face and the seconds ticking away on his watch. We compromised with a brisk walk, trying to ignore the streetlights flickering on one by one. Eventually, the pavement faded into a worn-down path, with grass and dandelions creeping up out of every crack. The air began to feel still and cool. It felt as though the plant was loosening its grip on me. I'd forgotten what it was like to breathe so easily. "There," said Toby, his face flush with pride. We'd come into a clearing, surrounded by trees and covered in a lush blanket of grass. Wildflowers were dotted about, pastel shades of purple, blue and pink amidst the sea of green. The last few rays of sunlight shimmered on a bubbling stream, over which stood a quaint brick bridge. I couldn't believe the starkness of this wonderful place to Strand Street. I'd stepped out of a black and white picture and into dazzling technicolor. But the best part of all was the quiet. As Toby had promised, all that could be heard in the clearing was the soft running of the stream and the breeze blowing in the trees. "See, I told you, Charlie," he said, his face lit up with excitement. "It's nice here, isn't it?" I could have stayed there forever. We picked flowers, felt the soft grass on our toes, chucked poo sticks over the side of the bridge, and excitedly watched them sail down the stream. I felt a lightness in my chest and a sense of freedom I'd not felt since we left the city. We climbed trees, looked for fish in the brook, and watched the sun disappear down past the horizon. The sunset, the time, the rules. It had suddenly gotten very, very dark. Although the rules had become part of our DNA, it was difficult to grapple with the new and pestering longing to stay in the clearing for even 5 minutes more. "Our parents will be cross," said Toby, still looking wistfully towards the bridge. Then, with a reluctant sigh, he turned back towards me. "We'll come another day." I dropped my flowers and began ambling after Toby, back towards the gray. But as we headed back, things seemed different to how they had before. In the dark, the tree branches reached out over us like bony fingers, blotting out the last of the light. The plant's groaning started up again, snatching away the last comforting sounds of the clearing. Then there was a new sound, a rustling behind us, following us. Toby didn't say anything, but he took my little hand into his, and we walked just a half a step faster. The rustling came again, this time closer. "Let's run," Toby whispered, his voice tight with fear. As we sped up, the rustling did too. It was louder, more frantic, like a creature on the hunt. Right as the street lamps came into view, we heard it. A loud, screeching, painful sound. The thing made a screaming howl, deep and primal, that almost knocked us off our feet. This was followed by several sharp, unnatural clicks. Whatever it was big. I didn't realize I had tripped until I smacked down hard on the pavement, scraping my knees raw and narrowly avoiding taking Toby down with me. He was too panicked to speak, desperately pulling me up. It wasn't working. I was stuck in something black. It was like a thick puddle of tar, but it was moving, gliding towards us at an unnatural speed. The noises came from somewhere deep within it, shooting out of a gaping hole in its core. Two spindly arms began to reach from the creature. The clicks and grunts were in my ear now, and the ooze was burning my feet as I tried to wiggle them free. It had just reached my knees when Toby finally gave a strong heave, and then we were back on our feet. We ran and ran and ran. Things became a blur. I remember nearly falling over the threshold in my desperate attempt to get inside. My parents slammed the door behind us, locking and bolting it and being shoved to the ground by the thing throwing itself against the door. It wasn't finished with us yet. Toby's mom ushered us away as my parents pushed back against it. I had been in such a rush to get inside, to get away from that thing, that I hadn't noticed what it had done to my legs. The skin on my shins had melted, sloughing off to reveal red-hot, angry patches of flesh that had soaked my shoes in blood. Toby looked down at them and started to cry. He hadn't let go of my hand. We did separate finally when Mars Grieg began to clean the wounds, and Toby came over all faint and needed to lay down. Mrs. Grieg picked fibers out of my raw flesh where my socks had melted into my skin. I tried my best to look away, but then my focus would drift to the insistent banging on the door, and I wasn't sure which was worse. I turned my attention to Mrs. Grieg instead, who was now dressing my legs with all the care and precision of a surgeon. It was as if she had done this before, like she was prepared for this. Once the banging had stopped and the thing seemed to have retreated, Mars Grieg needed to treat another casualty, my mum. She'd been leaning against the door when the same acid that got my legs had suddenly burst through the letterbox, leaving a big, searing rectangle on her shoulder. Later, Mars Grieg pulled Toby aside and told him that his dad was missing. She explained that when he and my dad came home and found our terrified mothers unable to find us, Mars Grieg went out to search. He hadn't come back. Things were strange afterwards. My dad still smiled at me, but it never quite reached his eyes. He went to work and came home, bolting the door which had stayed shut since he left that morning. We saw the Griegs sometimes, though they mostly stayed indoors now too. I'd sometimes catch a glimpse of a tired-looking Toby rushing by, superglued to his mum's side. He wasn't the same boy I'd known before. He'd come over sometimes following Mars Grieg as she helped my mum and I with our healing burns, putting on a special cream that made them sting. Toby and I could never quite look at one another, though. I knew he was feeling the same guilt I was, and it had made us wary of one another. As if we knew that at any moment either of us could make a decision again that put us right back in that situation. Nobody looked for Mars Grieg. Life went on. People on the street went to work. The plant kept on chugging. Mum bought me long school trousers to wear. I tried not to itch my healing legs. I tried not to think about the clearing and how much I wanted to go there again. I felt guilty when I did want to. Toby and I moved through school, going through the motions. We eventually grew close again, but never talked about what had happened that night. We walked home from school together, chatting away happily, as if we were children again, laughing without a care in the world. One day, though, I wasn't thinking, and halfway through a story about a silly thing my dad had done years ago, I looked up to see Toby's downcast face. "Sorry, Toby," I said, patting his arm. "I miss him," he sighed. "I wish we could at least talk about him." But he trailed off, nodding his head towards his door where we knew his mum was waiting. "He's still with you," I said. Toby gave a small smile before stepping inside. Over the years, things took their toll on my parents. They would wait until they thought I was asleep to argue, sometimes shouting into the early hours of the morning. I would tuck myself tight into my duvet, holding my teddy over one ear and my hand against the other to try and block out the sound, even when I had become much too old for that. Sometimes I would hear my mum shouting on bad nights she would drag up that night about our burns and whatever had happened to Margrieg. My dad didn't usually have anything to say at all. It was a bad night tonight. It had been 8 years since the day we were followed home. My legs had calmed from an angry red to a scarred pink. They still ached, though, as I tiptoed out onto the landing to try and hear what my mum was shouting about. "It's not worth it, Nick. It's not worth it," she screamed. They worried less about me hearing them as I got older. Maybe I should be used to it. I still held my teddy close to my chest and tried hard to hold back the tears, feeling childish. I jumped suddenly as I heard the bolt of the door slide open, and then a hard slam. I crept down the stairs, seeing my dad, alone, in the hallway. "Dad," I called out. I think because the changes had been over so many years, I didn't take much notice of them. My dad had never been the biggest man, but looking at him now I could see how much smaller he had become. He was thin and hunched over slightly, probably from the years of lab hour at the plant. He'd lost his hair and spent more time coughing than talking these days. He'd lost his smile long ago. He'd lost himself then too. "She's gone," he whispered, staring past the open doorway. It took me a couple seconds to realize what that meant. My mum had gone outside at night, in the dark, where that thing would be. If my dad felt anything, it didn't show. He stood in the hall, his bony hands twitching. He didn't say anything, either, when I pulled on my coat and slipped past him, out the door and into the dark. It was already ink black outside. The street lamps flickered like a flame about to extinguish. I heard a slam to my left and felt my legs buckle. Charlie Toby's voice shot out. He shut his door, not bothering to be quiet. Like my dad, Mrs. Grieg seemed to have given up long ago. "Toby, it's my mum," she. "I saw her, she went down there," Toby said, gesturing towards a winding alleyway that cut through the back of the terrace row. "Come on," he said, putting on a brave face. "I'll come with you." We walked side by side down the alley, straining to listen for any sign of my mum and hearing only the plant's screeching groans. The earth shook beneath us, making pebbles bounce against the pavement. I breathed in the sickly chemical smell and my heart began to pound. We checked behind us every now and then, but our parents never followed. We heard a sudden, splitting scream from what sounded like the next street over. My heart skipped a beat and Toby reached out, gripping my hand. We continued down the alley, and I began to hear a noise that had been echoing in my nightmares for the past 8 years. Click, 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 click. Toby's grip tightened. "It's okay," I lied, not sure who I was trying to reassure. I took a tentative step forward. I felt like I was teetering along the edge of a bear pit. The clicking sounded again, this time closer. The alleyway began to close in on us. We were going head to head with the creature again, and this time we had backed ourselves into a corner. The creature was well aware of this, taking its time to make a grand entrance. Tar began to seep along the ground, hissing and bubbling. My legs began to burn just looking at it, and as I lifted my feet to run, gallons of the stuff began to surround us. I watched it dissolve a stone in its path, and a cold dread gripped my insides as I prayed we would go quickly too, once it reached us. Then its arms appeared, reaching slowly from the bubbling tar, and without warning, a face shot forward. It was so much worse than I remembered. A hideous screech tore from its throat, spraying tar which landed just a hair away from Toby's head. It rose above us, a body appearing and contorting violently before slamming down again. It crawled on its front towards us, its mangled fingers digging into the concrete. The tar slipped away for a split second, and I saw a hand that could almost be human. It was all sinew and muscle, as if the black tar was its flesh. It twisted again violently, letting out another agonized howl as tar began to surround us. Just as it twisted, more tar slipped away. A human's back appeared. The plant was screeching louder than ever. The earth shook, and a deep rumbling came from inside. Heat began to radiate off of the creature, and I gagged as smoke began to fill my lungs. Toby looked over at me with a look on his face I had never seen before. Determined, resolute. He looked over at the archway behind the creature, which had widened as the tar ate up each brick it touched. He looked back at me with a faint, sad smile. "You'll be okay, Charlie," he said, softly. And then he let go of my hand. I screamed when I saw him run, bouncing off the wall and landing in a puddle of tar which sizzled against his shoes. He was out of the alleyway in seconds, leaving me alone with the creature. It looked at me, the face featureless besides a twisted open mouth. It let out a final blood-curdling howl before spinning around, following Toby out of the alley and into the dark. The tar came unstuck from the ground and was swept behind the creature, taking a layer of concrete with it. Everything became blurry and I finally let the tears fall from my eyes. I tried to listen for any sounds of Toby, any sign that he was out there. But all that echoed through the night was the rumblings of the plant as it slowed back down into its regular rhythm. I've always found it difficult to keep up with Toby. He moves a mile a minute, and so do his thoughts. I wondered for a second how he could have known that his gamble would work, that the creature would choose him instead. He must have seen what I saw, too, when the creature's back was exposed. A large, letterbox-shaped scar on the shoulder.